Hello, Liberty Church, Collingswood. The scripture reading for this evening, Friday, December 23rd, is from 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 1, 13 to 25. And in our passage from yesterday, the Apostle Peter, he was praising God. He was reminding his readers of the gospel. He was reminding them of this good news of God's promised salvation of his people through Jesus, this message that was proclaimed from the very beginning through his prophets. But here in these verses, we see the Apostle Peter, he shifts gears. And you see there, therefore. And you always ask when you see that in Scripture, what is the therefore? And what he's saying is that in light of all that, in light of that message, in light of the gospel, he then now exhorts his readers, the followers of Jesus, to live in a certain way. He shifts, in other words, from indicative to imperative. He shifts from statements of fact about who God is and about who we are as his redeemed people to commands. And this is a common move that you'll see all over the New Testament in letters. I think specifically of letters of the Apostle Paul, like Romans. He does this same thing. And the language here in this passage in verse 13, I think is fascinating. It really stands out to me as I meditate and look at this passage where he tells us to prepare our minds for action, to be sober-minded, to be sober. And this actually is the Greek word here for literal sobriety, to not be drunk. But his point here isn't about alcohol. His point here is that we should not be distracted as God's people, but that we should be clear-minded, that we should be alert, that we should be ready. And Peter uses this same language and this same word later in this very same letter. In chapter 4, verse 7, he says, "The end of all things is at hand. Therefore be self-controlled and sober-minded." And then again in chapter 5, verses 8 and 9, "Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in the faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brothers and sisters throughout the world." And you actually see this also in the Apostle Paul. I won't read these passages just for the sake of time, but he uses the same language talking about Jesus' second coming. 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 1 to 8. Even Jesus, again, in Luke 12, 35 to 37, tells his disciples, right after the famous passage about not being anxious, he then says this, "Stay dressed for action. Keep your lamps burning and be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes." See, because of Jesus' first advent, which we're celebrating during this season of Advent, during this season of Christmas, because of that first advent and because of Jesus' second coming, his second advent that's still in the future, because of those two things living here in the middle, we have an obligation, we have a calling to live in a certain way, which Peter then explains in our passage this evening. We are called to live in a way that pleases God. We are called to live in a way that reflects his holiness and his love and his grace. And so I tell you, in light of this passage, in light of these passages, this idea of being sober-minded, don't allow the world, the flesh, and the devil to lull you to sleep. Don't allow those things that are contrary to God to destroy you. Instead, keep vigilant, stay alert, stay watchful. Walk in the way of Jesus, keeping your eye looking ahead to the hope that is to come. Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again, and we look forward to that day. I hope you've enjoyed these videos over the last 4 weeks. It's been really great for our staff and for our elders and for our deacons to be with you throughout Advent, to give you some thoughts and ideas about these passages. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have, and we hope to see you tomorrow morning at our Christmas Eve service, 11:15 a.m. at Holy Trinity. See you there. Grace and peace.